The ringing started before I even opened my eyes. A faint buzz at first, then louder, slicing through the kind of silence that only exists after midnight. I thought it might stop. It didn't. I turned over, feeling for the phone on the nightstand. The screen glowed against the dark, and when I saw his name, my stomach sank before my mind caught up. Evan, my son. It had been months since his last call. I almost didn't answer. Mothers learn to survive long silences, to stop waiting for gratitude that never comes. But something in me still reached out, as if my hand remembered love even when my heart didn't. "Mom," he said the moment I picked up. His voice wasn't calm, it was cracked, desperate. "Please, I need your help." At first, I thought he'd been in an accident. My heart raced. "Are you hurt? Where are you?" "No, it's not that. I messed up. I made a huge mistake." I sat up in bed, pressing the phone close to my ear. I could hear him breathing fast, like someone being chased by their own choices. He kept talking, words tumbling over each other: crypto investments, market crashes, loans, deadlines, the bank, a house on the line. It was all noise until I heard one number clearly. 80,000. The room seemed to shrink, my breath caught. 80,000 what? Dollars, he whispered. Real money. I took out a second mortgage. If I don't pay by next week, they'll take the house. Samantha doesn't even know everything. Please, Mom, I can't lose everything. The sound of his voice pulled me back 20 years, to the boy who used to run to me after nightmares, who believed I could fix anything with a hug and a story. That was the worst part of motherhood. No matter how old they get, your mind still sees the child beneath the mistakes. "Slow down," I said, though my hands were trembling. "We'll figure something out." "Please, I swear I'll pay you back. I'll make it right." I wanted to believe him. I always did. But belief doesn't pay bills. Still, I heard myself say, "Go to sleep. We'll talk in the morning." After I hung up, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the dark kitchen with my old mug of cold coffee, watching the second hand of the clock move slower than my thoughts. The house creaked like it was remembering things I didn't want to. Every tick was a question: how, when, why again? By dawn, I had made my decision. There was no drama in it, just the quiet, familiar rhythm of a mother choosing to bleed again for her child. I took a shower, ironed a blouse, and put on the same gray slacks I used for church. At the bank, the clerk smiled politely and asked how she could help. I told her I needed to withdraw everything: savings, pension, the small inheritance from my late husband. She blinked, maybe wondering why someone like me would need that much cash. "May I ask what it's for?" She said gently. "My son," I replied. "He's in trouble." She hesitated. "You understand this puts your own finances at risk?" I nodded. "I understand." There was a kind of finality in signing my name that morning. My hand shook, but I didn't stop. I'd signed marriage papers, mortgage contracts, medical bills, death certificates, every one of them an act of faith. This was no different. Just one more act of faith, though I didn't know what God I was still praying to. When the cashier's check slid across the counter, I stared at it like it was both a weapon and a wound. $80,000, every dollar I had, my name written neatly at the bottom like proof that love could still ruin logic. That afternoon, I called Evan and told him to meet me at the bank. His voice broke with relief. "You're saving my life, Mom." I wish I had felt like a hero. Mostly, I felt old. Old and tired and afraid that I was doing the same thing again, mistaking rescue for love. He was already there when I arrived. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes red. He hugged me hard, the kind of hug that says thank you and I'm scared at the same time. When we walked to the counter, the teller recognized me from earlier and gave me a sympathetic smile. I handed over the check, watched the computer screen blink, and listened to the sound of my security dissolving into his second chance. "It's done," the teller said finally. Evan turned to me with tears in his eyes. "I owe you forever." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Just promise me this is the last time." He kissed my forehead. "You'll stay with us for a while, right? It'll save you rent money. Samantha will love having you around." The way he said it, so casual, so sure, made me forget for a moment how fragile gratitude can be. I wanted to believe that maybe this time, love would be enough to keep us close. Outside, the air smelled of rain. I watched him walk ahead, phone already in hand, talking fast to someone I couldn't hear. For a moment, I thought of calling after him, reminding him to drive safely, to eat something, to come by for dinner like he used to. But the words stayed behind my teeth. Mothers carry so many unsaid things. That night I came home, placed the bank receipt inside a wooden box, and sat by the window until the sun disappeared. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that something had shifted, that what I gave away today wasn't money. It was trust. And I wasn't sure I'd ever get it back. Morning arrived like a tired apology. The sky was the color of dishwater, and the street was still damp from a light rain that came and went while I stared at the ceiling. I brewed coffee that tasted like nothing and ate a small slice of bread simply because my hands did not know what to do without feeding someone. I checked my phone twice to see if Evan had written a thank you, then felt ashamed for wanting one. At 9, he called. "You should come stay for a bit," he said. "It will help you save money. I talked to Samantha. We will make the guest room nice." I opened the curtain and watched a stray cat pick its way along the fence line. The cat moved with the kind of caution that comes from too many surprises. I understood. I told him I would pack a small suitcase and come by in the afternoon. I folded clothes slowly. I added a sweater that smelled faintly of lavender, 2 pairs of slacks, a white blouse that still held a faint trace of the perfume I wore when his father was alive. I tucked in the small wooden box with the bank receipt and an old photograph of Evan at 6, missing his front teeth and grinning like the world was a friendly place. I wanted to believe he could find that boy again. Before I left, I stopped at the church. The sanctuary was empty, just rows of silent pews and a soft scent of lemon oil and wax. I did not pray for miracles. I asked for a clear mind and a steady heart. I lit a candle and watched the flame steady itself after a small shake. There was a lesson in that. I did not know which part of it was for me yet. When I pulled up at Evan's house, the lawn looked freshly cut. New patio chairs waited by the porch. A family had been built here while I learned to enjoy my quiet. He opened the door with a quick smile and a distracted hello, the phone at his ear again, the modern badge of a life lived elsewhere. He mouthed one moment and hugged me with one arm. The hug felt like a coat thrown over a chair. There, but not placed with care. Samantha came from the kitchen with a cautious warmth. Her arms were full of folded towels, her smile bright and rehearsed. She kissed my cheek and said she was glad I would be with them for a while. She said it twice, the second time a little softer, as if the words would fit better if they were smoothed by repetition. "The guest room is ready," she said. "We changed the sheets and aired the curtains. Tell me if you need anything at all." I followed her down the hallway, past family photos in neat black frames, Evan in a suit, Samantha in a sun hat by a lake, the children on a swing set, legs flying toward a sky that looked very blue in those pictures. My face appeared only once. At a graduation, half-turned, someone caught me laughing at something just out of frame. I looked like a woman who had not learned yet that laughter would become a private practice. The guest room smelled like detergent and new paint. The bedspread was gray and the pillows were fluffed. There was a small lamp and a small chair and a small rug that tried very hard to be soft. I set my suitcase by the closet and smoothed a wrinkle from the bedspread that no one else would have noticed. "Thank you," I said to Samantha. "It is very kind." "No trouble," she answered, and the words fell in the space between us like something we both pretended not to hear. We ate a late lunch. The children told me about their school projects. I asked questions and listened. I have always been good at listening. It is how I learned what people truly mean when they do not say it. Evan kept glancing at his phone and excusing himself to take brief calls. Samantha described a new coffee blend she had discovered and the way it tasted like chocolate if you closed your eyes. I tried it and could not find the chocolate, but I said I could see how someone could. After lunch, Evan took me aside and led me to the small office by the garage. "I have a plan," he said, eyes bright with that particular strain of certainty that often precedes another mistake. "I will take it slow. No more risky bets. We will stabilize, then scale. I learned my lesson." I nodded. "Good," I said. "Lessons are expensive. Best to use them." He laughed at that and hugged me again, a better hug this time, both arms, a second longer than courtesy. For a moment I felt him let go of whatever he had been holding on to. Then the moment closed and he was again the man who had a deal to save and a day to outpace. In the late afternoon, we drove to the bank to collect the final documents. The light was kind and the clouds had finally decided to move on. The same teller from yesterday greeted us with a soft nod. She had the calm of someone who files facts for a living. She slid papers across the desk in a tidy stack. The words were not meant for poetry. They were meant for permanence. If you looked closely, you could see how they were built to outlast feelings. I read each page. I took my time. I have spent a life missing nothing. When I signed, I wrote my full name with care, as if the letters themselves were small anchors that might keep some part of me steady. The teller gathered the pages, stamped the last one, and placed them in a legal folder. "Everything is in order," she said. "You are all set." Evan exhaled as if he had been underwater and only now found air. On the way home, he turned the music up and talked about a new opportunity that would fix what had just been fixed. the car filled with his ideas. I looked out the window and watched the city slide by in slow pieces. A man watered a line of potted plants outside a barber shop. A woman in scrubs crossed the street with a bag of groceries and an exhausted smile. Life kept making small, honest promises in every direction. I tucked that away for later. That evening, we ate at the kitchen island. The children insisted on telling me knock-knock jokes that made no sense and made perfect sense. I laughed until my eyes watered at the one about the banana that became an orange at the punch line. Samantha watched me laugh and seemed relieved that I could. I thanked her for dinner and for the clean room, and she said of course in that careful tone again. When the children went to sleep, the house settled. Evan stayed up to answer emails. Samantha wiped the counters twice more than necessary. I took a cup of tea to the guest room and sat in the dark with the door open a few inches, the way I used to sleep when Evan was little in case he needed anything. Old habits are hard to retire. They are stitched to the nights. I opened the wooden box and placed the bank receipt inside next to the photograph of the toothless grin. For a long time, I held the photo in my hands. I could feel the ridges where the paper had been bent. I remembered the way he had run to me after every small victory and every small disaster. He would say, "Tell me it will be fine," and I would say it will be fine even when the truth was we would have to make it fine ourselves. I turned off the lamp and lay back. The house made different sounds than mine. The refrigerator hummed in a deeper register. The vents clicked just before they breathed. The branches outside tapped the window in a rhythm I did not know yet. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine this guest room as a safe harbor and not a borrowed dock. I told myself I was here to rest, not to earn my welcome. I told myself I was here because I had chosen it. I was not sure if that last part was true. Sleep came in short pieces. I woke twice to the sound of a text arriving on someone else's phone. I woke once to my own name drifting down the hall from a dream I could not place. At 2 a.m, I reheated the tea and stood by the window. The street was empty, the sky was clear. Somewhere close, a dog barked once, then thought better of it. I pressed my fingertips to the glass and felt the thin idea of cold. It is strange how quickly love becomes a ledger when fear sits at the table. You do not notice the math at first. You only notice the urgency. Then you begin to count what you have given and what you have left. You tell yourself that it is not about keeping score. You tell yourself that this is a family and not a balance sheet. You tell yourself what you must in order to say yes again. At 6, the house woke. Samantha moved quietly through the kitchen. The children argued about a milk carton. Evan showered and sang 2 lines of an old pop song the radio tried to retire. I made breakfast because it seemed like a relief to someone. I scrambled eggs the way he likes, soft and slow with a little milk. He said thanks with his mouth and not his eyes. It was a small thing, and I put it in a small pocket and told myself not to carry it long. After they left, I stripped the guest bed and washed the sheets even though they were clean. I reorganized the pantry and made a list of things that would make dinners easier. I stood in the quiet afterward and felt what happens when a woman starts trying to deserve a room that was offered with a smile and a careful tone. I caught myself doing it and laughed softly. Old habits, always the old ones. In the afternoon, I walked to the corner store for flour and sugar. The owner asked if I was new to the neighborhood. I told him I was visiting family. He smiled like he believed me, and that felt like a blessing. On the way back, I passed a small sign taped to a lamppost. It offered piano lessons for adults who were brave enough to sound terrible for a while. I took one of the little tabs with the number. I put it in my pocket and told myself that bravery comes in many volumes. That night, Evan came home late but came home smiling. He had solved a small problem and wore the victory like a new jacket. He kissed the top of my head on the way to the fridge and said we would celebrate soon. Samantha poured me a glass of sweet tea, and we watched a cooking show where everyone chopped vegetables faster than seemed possible. I said that speed does not make a stew. She laughed and agreed, and for a moment we were simply 2 women in a kitchen being ordinary together. I wanted to stretch that moment as if it were dough and make it feed us for days. When I went to bed, I closed the guest room door for the first time. I placed the wooden box in the drawer of the nightstand. I rested my hand on it a moment longer than anyone would think necessary. Paper is lighter than a secret and heavier than a promise. It remembers what people forget. It waits without complaint. It endures the weather. I turned off the lamp and whispered to the dark that I would try to sleep without listening for footsteps. I promised myself that I would not measure love by the volume of thanks. I promised that I would not mistake my giving for a guarantee. The last thought before sleep was simple and honest and a little sad. I had given my son a house that was safe again. I hoped he would learn how to live inside it. Tomorrow would be another day of small decisions and quiet chores. Tomorrow I would bake bread and hang fresh towels and try to believe that gratitude grows best when it is not hunted. Tomorrow I would begin to learn the shape of this new life. I did not yet know that every shape casts a shadow and that some shadows only show themselves when you stand in the brightest room. I fell asleep at last. The house kept breathing. The night kept its secrets. And in that unremarkable peace, the story moved forward, steady as a clock that does not rush even when hearts do. The morning after my first night in their house felt like stepping into someone else's dream. Everything looked polished, coordinated, curated. The sunlight entered through large windows that had never known dust, spilling across marble counters and stainless steel appliances that hummed quietly, as if manners applied even to machines here. Samantha moved through the kitchen with the measured grace of someone hosting a polite stranger. She offered coffee in a porcelain mug that matched the plate beneath it, then asked whether I slept well. I said yes. She smiled. It was the kind of smile that closed a door rather than opened one. The children came downstairs in uniforms that made them look identical except for height. They greeted me in quick, cheerful bursts before turning their attention to cereal boxes and cartoons on a small screen tucked by the fridge. Their laughter should have filled the house, yet somehow it echoed as if even joy had to whisper. Evan entered last, adjusting his tie, one hand holding his phone, the other juggling car keys. "Big day," he said to no one in particular. He kissed Samantha on the cheek, nodded at me, and gulped half a cup of coffee without sitting down. "I'll be late tonight. Meeting investors." Then he was gone, a rush of movement that left the door swinging slightly behind him. I sat at the table with my untouched coffee and listened to the emptiness that followed. It wasn't silence exactly, it was the absence of being needed. By noon, Samantha had returned from yoga and answered work emails on her tablet while I wiped down already clean counters. "You don't have to do that," she said gently, not looking up. I smiled. "I know," but I kept wiping. It was easier to polish steel than to sit idle inside gratitude that never quite landed. The days slipped into each other. I cooked dinners that smelled like memory: beef stew, chicken soup, apple cobbler. Everyone said thank you, but the words had the thinness of receipts. At night I folded laundry that wasn't mine and watched shows I didn't choose. I told myself this was what family looked like: modern and efficient, love translated into schedules and polite coordination. Evan grew busier. His phone calls grew longer. Sometimes I caught bits of sentences that sounded like risk, return, percentage. I didn't ask. A mother learns when questions are invitations and when they are warnings. One Thursday evening, Samantha suggested that we rotate cooking duties. "So you can rest, Rosie, you've done so much." Her tone was wrapped in kindness but tied with distance. I said that was fine. She smiled, relieved. The following Sunday, I baked bread the way my husband used to love, slowly, patiently, with the kitchen warm and full of the smell of yeast and promise. Evan came home late. He walked in, saw the bread on the counter, and smiled for real. "Smells like my childhood," he said, tearing a piece while it was still hot. For a heartbeat, the years folded in on themselves, and I saw the boy who used to sit on the counter kicking his legs while I taught him how to measure flour with the back of a spoon. But then his phone buzzed. The smile vanished as he read whatever message waited there. He chewed once, distracted. "Thanks, Mom," he said. "This is great." And he was gone again. Later that night, I went out to the porch. The air was cool and the sky clean. Through the windows I could see Samantha clearing dishes, the children chasing each other upstairs, the rhythm of a life that now moved smoothly without me. I thought of the house I'd sold, the creaky porch swing, the chipped blue paint, the little rose bush that never quite died no matter how harsh the winter. That house had been small but alive. This one was perfect but hollow. Inside, the clock in the hallway chimed 10. I returned to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed. The wooden box was still in the drawer, quiet, patient. I placed my hand on it, not to open it but to remind myself that something inside still belonged to me. Over the next few weeks, the small changes began. My tea kettle disappeared from the kitchen counter. The soap I'd brought was replaced with one that matched the other bottles. A photo of me with the grandchildren was moved from the living room shelf to the hallway, then quietly vanished. None of it was unkind, it was polite erasure. The kind that smiles while rearranging the evidence of your existence. Evan didn't notice, or maybe he chose not to. He came home later and later. When we did speak, our conversations were weather reports, Nice day, long week. Sleep well. One evening, Samantha announced that she had redecorated the guest room. She had chosen new curtains, a softer color palette, something more calming. I thanked her, though I missed the gray ones that let me see a sliver of the streetlight at night. The new curtains blocked everything. I began taking long walks after breakfast. The neighborhood was all trimmed hedges and quiet ambition. People waved but didn't slow down. The mailman learned my name first. He called me Miss Rosie, the way Southerners do when they mean to be friendly without guessing age. Sometimes I stopped at the small park with a bench by the pond. Ducks glided over the surface, calm and certain, unbothered by reflections. I would sit there until I could feel myself breathing again. Each time I returned, the house seemed a little quieter, as if sound itself had learned to tiptoe. One night, Samantha hosted a dinner for her friends. The table gleamed with white plates and tall glasses. I offered to help, and she insisted I rest. I stayed upstairs, hearing laughter and music floating up like perfume. At some point, someone said, "It must be nice having extra help around," followed by soft laughter and a hurried change of topic. I didn't need to know who said it. I read a few pages of a novel I couldn't focus on. Every line slipped away before it reached meaning. Around midnight, the last car left. The lights went out room by room until only the porch lamp remained. I closed my book and whispered into the dark, "You are a guest, remember." The next morning, I found a small note on the kitchen counter. It was written in Samantha's looping script. "We're grateful for everything you do. Let's talk soon about a long-term plan that keeps everyone comfortable." I folded the note and slid it into my pocket. I didn't need to read it twice. The note stayed in my pocket all morning. It felt heavier than paper should. I carried it through laundry loads and grocery runs, through quiet hours spent pretending not to notice how Samantha's tone had changed. Every kindness now had a timer attached to it, ticking softly underneath the words. That night I decided to make lasagna. It had always been Evan's favorite. I made it the way I used to when he was little, layered slow, with too much cheese and a pinch of nutmeg he never knew about. The smell filled the kitchen the way memories sometimes do, stretching themselves across years until you can almost believe nothing has changed. When they came home, the table was already set. The children cheered. Even Samantha smiled, though her smile looked rehearsed. "You didn't have to cook, Rosie," she said. "We were just going to order in." "I wanted to," I replied. "It's been a while since we all ate together." Evan's face softened. "Smells amazing, Mom." We sat. The first few minutes were peaceful, familiar. The lasagna steamed. The salad bowl passed from hand to hand. Then the quiet began, thin cracks spreading across the small talk. Samantha set down her fork and looked at Evan, then at me. "This house feels a little cramped lately," she began carefully. "With everyone's schedules, the kids' activities, and everything. Maybe it's time we talk about something more comfortable for all of us." I waited for her to continue. She didn't need to. I already knew where it was going. "If you could find another place," she said finally, "even temporarily, I think it would help everyone breathe a little." Her tone wasn't cruel. It was composed, the way a doctor might deliver a diagnosis. My fork paused midair. The smell of baked cheese suddenly felt too thick to breathe in. I looked at Evan, my son, the boy who used to ask for bedtime stories, who once swore he'd build me a house by the ocean someday. He didn't look up from his plate. He just kept scrolling through his phone, his thumb moving in small, nervous circles. "Evan," I said softly. He cleared his throat. "Mom, I think maybe it's for the best. You deserve your own space. You've done so much for us. We just want you to be comfortable." Comfortable. It was a word people used when they meant invisible. I placed my fork down gently. "Of course," I said. My voice surprised me, it didn't shake. "I suppose I can look into options." Nobody answered. Samantha smiled, relieved. The children stared at their plates. The room filled with the quiet clinking of cutlery against porcelain, the small sounds of retreat. After dinner, I washed the dishes alone. The water was too hot, but I didn't adjust it. Sometimes it helps to let something burn a little. Through the window, I could see the porch light flicker. A moth kept throwing itself against it again and again, desperate for warmth it would never keep. That night I packed a few things. Not all, just enough to move quickly if I had to. I folded my clothes quietly, the way I used to fold his when he was a boy sleeping next door. My hands remembered the size of him, the weight of his little shirts, the smell of soap and sunlight that clung to the fabric. The next week passed like a slow erasure. Samantha stopped saying good morning. Evan worked later, slept longer. The children still hugged me, but their hugs felt hurried, as if affection now required permission. On Friday, I went out to buy groceries. I still cooked for them out of habit. Old love doesn't vanish, it simply changes shape. I filled my basket with the usual things: bread, flour, eggs, tomatoes, olive oil, and hummed to myself in the checkout line. When I returned, I found the front door locked. At first, I thought I had misremembered the key. I tried again. Nothing. I knocked once, twice. The lights were on. My heart began to race. I called Evan. No answer. I texted, "Hey, the lock isn't working. Are you home?" Minutes passed. Then a reply, "Be there soon." I sat on the porch, groceries at my feet, the afternoon sun slipping lower. When they pulled up, I stood. Evan looked surprised to see me standing there like a ghost. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "What am I, Evan? I live here." He didn't meet my eyes. Samantha stepped out from behind him, her arms crossed. "We had to change the locks," she said. "It was a safety thing. The kids kept misplacing their keys." I stared at her. "You didn't tell me." "We tried calling," she lied. Evan shifted his weight. "Look, Mom, it's not working. You need your own space. We're all stressed. It's just too much." "Too much," I repeated. The words tasted metallic. "I paid your debt, Evan. I sold my house. I gave you everything I had." His face twisted, something between guilt and irritation. "Yeah, well, nobody asked you to. You did that on your own. You can't throw it in our faces forever." I felt the air leave my body. "I didn't expect anything," I said quietly. He snapped. "You've lived off me for years, Mom. You've always made me feel like I owe you something. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of carrying you. You're like a leech just sucking the life out of everything. Why don't you do us all a favor and disappear?" The world tilted. The porch beneath my feet blurred. I saw his mouth moving, Samantha's hand on his arm, the children's faces pressed to the window upstairs, small and silent. I saw the house I had saved standing tall behind him, solid and smug like it had already chosen sides. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I nodded. "All right," I said. "If that's what you want." He said nothing. Samantha looked away. I bent down, picked up the grocery bags, and walked to the sidewalk. My legs shook, but I kept walking. At the end of the street, I turned once and looked back. The porch light glowed faintly. The same moth still battered itself against it. I laughed, soft and bitter, the kind of laugh that breaks without sound. By the time I reached the main road, the sun had fallen completely. I hailed a cab and whispered the only address I could think of: the church near the river. The driver didn't ask questions. He just drove. In the back seat, I placed my hands on my lap and stared at them. They were old hands, lined and worn, but steady. They thought they had broken me. They did not know that paper remembers what people forget. And somewhere in a bank drawer not too far away, my name was still printed where it mattered most. The cab left me outside a quiet street that looked unfamiliar in every direction. I didn't have a plan. I only had the weight of 2 grocery bags and the sound of my own heart steadying itself. The church stood at the corner, its lights dim but warm, a faint glow spilling across the sidewalk like a gentle hand reaching out. I went there not because I needed prayer, but because I needed a place that didn't ask for explanations. A woman named Eileen answered when I knocked at the parish house next door. She was small, with gray curls and eyes that looked like they had seen enough sorrow to know when not to ask. "You need a room?" she said, and I nodded. She led me inside without another word. The apartment was small, just 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, and a window that faced a brick wall. It was clean, though, and smelled faintly of lemon soap. "It isn't much," she said. "It's enough," I replied. That night I unpacked what was left of my life. Clothes folded neatly in half a drawer. Groceries arranged in a small fridge that hummed like an old friend. On the counter, I placed the wooden box. It looked out of place there, too elegant for the chipped surface, but I left it where I could see it. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but tears require the kind of softness I no longer owned. Instead, I made tea and stared at the window until I realized I couldn't see my reflection anymore, only the faint outline of the lamp behind me. The next morning, I walked to the grocery store again. Not because I needed anything, but because walking made the hours easier to hold. The air was brisk, the kind that wakes the body before the mind can protest. People passed me without looking twice. That was its own kind of mercy. Back home, I wrote a list of things to do: open a new checking account, call the pension office, visit the church pantry and see if they needed volunteers. Routine is a way of keeping ghosts from multiplying. Eileen came by that evening with a plate of muffins. "I live upstairs," she said, "if you ever need company." "Thank you," I answered. "But I think I'll be fine." She smiled the way kind people do when they recognize a wound that wants to heal in private. For the first week, I barely slept. I kept dreaming of doors that opened to rooms full of light, doors that closed behind me before I could enter. One night, I woke to find my hands stretched toward the wall as if I were still reaching for something that no longer existed. On the 10th day, I went to the church pantry. The air smelled of stew and soap. Volunteers moved like a quiet army of mercy, sorting cans, folding donated clothes, serving meals to the people who had nowhere else to go. I joined without needing to explain why. Within an hour, I was one of them. Name? The coordinator asked. Rosie, I said, just Rosie. I didn't tell them about the house or Evan or the way silence can bruise deeper than words. They didn't ask. They only handed me an apron and said, "We're glad you're here." It felt like a strange kind of homecoming. Every evening, I returned to the apartment, tired in a way that made sleep kinder. I began to cook for myself again. Simple things: soup, bread, rice with vegetables. I listened to the radio instead of my thoughts. I even found a small notebook and started writing grocery lists and stray memories in it, things I didn't want to forget, things I never wanted to remember again, but wrote anyway because sometimes the act of remembering is its own revenge. Weeks passed, and still no call from Evan. Not even a text. I learned that absence doesn't echo forever. Eventually, it just becomes part of the background noise. One afternoon in late October, I walked to the bank to close my old account. The teller recognized my name. "Oh," she said, "you're the one who handled the mortgage paperwork for 215 Maple Street, right?" I froze. My voice came out steady. "Yes, why?" She checked her computer screen. "No reason, just wanted to confirm your contact information. You're listed as the principal on the loan, so any correspondence still goes to you." The words settled in me like a small, precise weight. Principal on the loan, I smiled faintly. "Thank you, that's correct." When I left the bank, I didn't go straight home. I walked through the park, past children feeding ducks, past a couple arguing softly on a bench, past a man sleeping beneath an old oak tree. The world went on without ceremony. But inside me, something quiet and certain shifted. That night, I took out the folder from the wooden box. The papers were still crisp. My signature still inked clean and sharp. I traced the line that said borrower, Rosie M. Todd. Then the one that said secured property, 215 Maple Street. I closed the folder and placed it back carefully. They had pushed me out of that house, locked the door, and told me to disappear. But they had forgotten who actually owned the lock. I smiled, not a cruel smile, just one of recognition. "Paper remembers," I whispered, "even when people don't." Outside, the streetlight flickered. I made another cup of tea and sat down, feeling a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about balance, about the difference between kindness and consent. It was then that I understood something I'd never dared to before. Love without respect isn't love, it's debt. And I'd paid mine in full. The cold arrived early that year, thin and insistent, slipping under sleeves and settling behind the ribs where worries like to sleep. I bought a second-hand coat from a thrift store around the corner, the kind with deep pockets that made you feel prepared for anything. Inside one pocket, I kept a folded tissue and a peppermint candy from the parish office. Inside the other, I kept a small pen and a folded note with 3 lines from the loan agreement. I did not need to read the lines anymore. I carried them the way a person carries a key while pretending her hands are empty. At the pantry, I learned the names of people I had never learned to see before. Dolores wrapped her Bible in a plastic bag whenever it rained. Kenny told jokes that were not always funny, but always kind. A man named Victor came every Wednesday for soup and left with a sweater if the weather turned mean. I watched the way they stood in line and spoke to one another with the small courtesies that keep a heart from rusting. "Thank you, after you, take mine, I have enough." They had lost many things, but not that. Sometimes I served at the window. Sometimes I sorted. Sometimes I swept. It all felt like the same work dressed in different tasks. Embers of dignity keep best when people tend the fire together. I slept better those nights, the kind of sleep that arrives when you are too tired to make a list of what hurts. Eileen started leaving a newspaper outside my door. She said it was an accident the first time, then forgot to keep pretending. One morning in late October, a small photo on the community page caught my eye. Evan and Samantha stood in front of a vacant lot that had a temporary fence around it and a banner with a cheerful font. "Local couple to launch Dream Cafe," the headline said. Beneath the picture was a quote about vision and community and bold beginnings. The picture looked expensive. The smiles did too. I read the paragraph twice. I folded the page and placed it under the wooden box. I made tea and stared at the steam until it thinned. Then I set the kettle back on the stove as if it were a decision. 3 days later, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. The same number. The third time I answered and said hello the way a person does when she will not be surprised by whatever comes next. "Mom," Evan said. His voice had the old tremor in it, the one I used to hear when he broke a window or a promise. "I need you to sign something. It is just paperwork. We are selling the house to fund the cafe. The bank says we cannot finalize without you." I sat down at the little table by the window. The street outside looked calm, the color of oatmeal and routine. "Why would you need me?" I asked, "if it is only a matter of your house?" He waited a second too long. "They say your name is on the secured deed." I did not realize. We thought once it was paid we were clear. I said nothing. He filled the silence with words he believed might work. He said sorry. He said please. He said it would only take a moment and that I would not be bothered again. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the exact sound of his laugh when he was 7. Memory can be a friend or a thief. That day it was both. "Come by on Tuesday," I said, 2 in the afternoon. They arrived early and stood on my doorstep with the posture of people who had rehearsed a better version of themselves in the car ride over. Samantha wore a soft sweater and no mascara. Evan held a folder that looked too thin to protect him. I had made tea. I had placed 2 cups on the table. I did not know if they would drink it. I placed the wooden box beside the sugar as if it were something ordinary that belonged there. We sat. The apartment felt smaller with them in it. The walls were clean and the air smelled faintly of lemon oil. The same lemon from the church pews, the same lemon from the first day Eileen opened the door. It felt like a circle, only quieter. "We did not mean to hurt you," Samantha began. Her hands were folded, tight and careful. "We were scared. It was a bad time. We should have handled everything differently." I nodded. "Yes." She waited for me to soften, and when I did not, she pressed on. "We are asking for your help now. If you sign the release, we can sell quickly. The cafe depends on it." Evan stared at a crack in the tile. The crack had a small fork in it near the table leg. I had always liked that fork, the way it made the line look like a path that had chosen itself. "Mom," he said, finally brave enough to look at me. "I know what I said. I cannot take it back. I am sorry." There is an ache in a mother that never learns to enjoy apologies. It only learns to measure them. I opened the wooden box and placed a folder on the table. I did not raise my voice. I did not change my breathing. I slid a page forward with the patience of someone who has waited for the tide to return and knows it always does. "This is the agreement," I said. "This is the deed. This is what the bank filed when the debt was paid. I am the borrower. The property is the collateral. To clear the lien, you will repay the principal and the interest listed here. 100,000, 12%. Samantha inhaled as if the room had run out of air. Evan closed his eyes. He did not open them for a long breath. When he did, he looked less like a man in trouble and more like a boy who had finally found the edges of the room he was in. He nodded once, not to me, to the math. "We cannot do that in 30 days, he said. "Please give us time." 30 days, I answered. "That is the time." He started to argue, then stopped. The page did not care about please. The page did not know the word tomorrow. Paper is honest that way. They left with promises that had a lot of weather inside them. When the door closed, the apartment grew taller. I put the folder away, washed the 2 teacups they never touched, and wiped the table until the wood looked like it remembered something kinder. I sat a long time with my hands open on my knees, palms up, the way I used to sit in church when I wanted to receive something without naming it. The next days were unremarkable in the way that lets a person think clearly. I went to the pantry. I folded sweaters. I learned to tell by touch which ones would scratch and which ones would comfort. A woman cried into her bowl and said the onions were strong. No one corrected her. We all nodded. We had all been blamed by onions before. At night, I walked the block twice before bed. The air on my face felt like a decision that did not need an audience. I began to notice details I had missed when I was busy being a mother who tried to take up less space than her love. The alley that smelled like wet iron after rain. The upstairs neighbor who practiced scales at 5 each morning and never once missed the note she reached for. The small tilt in the church steps that made you step higher with your left foot if you did not want to stumble. The world had a rhythm again, a quiet one, and I could hear it because I had stopped screaming inside. Evan called once more 2 weeks in to ask for more time. He sounded tired. I told him the date had not changed. He cried without noise. I held the phone and let the silence speak. When he hung up, I washed my face and told the mirror that mercy is not the same as surrender. The mirror agreed. On the 30th day, no payment arrived. The bank did what banks do. They filed what needed filing. A clerk stamped a page. A judge read a line. Movers were scheduled by someone who writes dates for a living. I did not attend. I made soup for the pantry and stayed late to sweep. After closing, I printed a small photo I had taken that morning. A foundation poured on a plot outside the city. A simple sign stuck in the dirt. Future home of R. Todd. I placed the photo in an envelope and wrote their names without a return address. Back home, I stood at the window and watched the streetlight flicker on and stay steady. I thought about doors again. This time, I pictured one that opened inward. A door that welcomed me into a room that did not belong to anyone else. I pictured walls the color of pale honey, a table by a window, a chair with a back that encouraged a straight spine. I pictured a piano with 3 silent keys that I would learn to coax into making decent sounds again. I boiled water and steeped tea. I set the cup on the sill and placed my palm over it to feel the warmth rise. That is where I found my smile, not sharp, not cruel, not even proud. A private smile that belonged to the part of me that had finally stopped asking permission to exist. I do not tell this to frighten anyone. I do not even tell it to inspire. I tell it because sometimes the only way to keep a story from owning you is to say it out loud until it stands at a distance where you can see its shape. Mine has the shape of a locked door that turned out to be a mirror. What I thought was a barrier was only a reflection I needed to meet without flinching. The night before the auction, I sat at the little table and wrote a single sentence on a scrap of paper. Not a threat, not a victory, an instruction to myself. It read, "Remember who signs first." I slipped the paper into the wooden box with the folder that had waited longer than I had known. I turned off the lamp and let the room go blue. I slept well. The next morning, the city woke without me. Trucks backed into driveways. Keys changed hands. Neighbors peeked through curtains because that is what neighbors do when the story on their street grows louder than their own. I walked to the river and watched the water move. It did not hurry and it did not stop. It kept its shape by letting go of whatever tried to hold it. When I came home, there was a new emptiness inside me, not the kind that hurts, the kind that makes room. I tidied the counter. I opened the window and let air in. I placed the wooden box on the center of the table. I touched the lid as if it were the top of a small, sleeping animal. Gentle, certain, they had asked me to disappear. It turned out I could do something better. Let them see what a ghost can do. The morning after the auction, the air felt lighter than it should have. There was no victory in it, no thrill, only stillness. Stillness and the faint echo of boxes being carried down a driveway somewhere far away. I boiled water for tea and sat at my small table, hands wrapped around the mug as if it were an anchor. The steam fogged the window in soft white circles, and I drew a line through it with my finger, just to prove I could still leave a mark on something. For the first time in months, my name was my own again. It wasn't attached to anyone else's debt, anyone else's need. Just Rosie Todd. A woman with an old coat, a modest apartment, and a balance restored not by revenge, but by arithmetic. That day I walked to the river. The sky was the color of pewter, heavy but beautiful. The water moved steady, not hurried, not slow, just steady, the way I wanted to move through the rest of my life. I sat on a bench and watched a small leaf spin in the current, caught but never drowned. There was a lesson in that, though I didn't put it into words. When I returned, a letter waited in my mailbox. It was from the bank, confirming the completion of the sale, the final transfer, the remaining balance cleared in my favor. I traced the embossed logo at the top of the paper and smiled. There was something satisfying about the way institutions speak when the math is finally even. Inside, I placed the letter in the wooden box. The folder inside had begun to wear at the edges, but the ink on the signatures remained sharp. I ran my thumb over the printed words, my name beside the words borrower and secured party. The world had tried to write me out, but here, in black and white, I was permanent. I didn't keep the money untouched. I never planned to. Paper isn't meant to sit. It's meant to move, to build, to repair, to prove you're still here. By spring, I had purchased a small plot of land outside of town. Nothing grand, just a stretch of earth with a few stubborn trees and a view of the distant hills. The contractor I hired was a quiet man named Mr. Lee, who spoke more with his eyes than his mouth. He didn't ask many questions, which made me trust him immediately. Simple foundation, I told him. One story, I don't need stairs anymore. He nodded. You want modern or classic? Neither, I said. I want something honest. He smiled at that, a small, knowing smile, and said, honest I can do. Over the next months, I visited the site often. Watching walls rise is not so different from watching a soul rebuild itself. The first time the roof beams went up, I cried without realizing it. Mr. Lee pretended not to notice. The workers called me Miss Rosie, though they were all younger by decades. They asked if the house was for my family. I said yes, because in a way it was the family I used to have, the one that still lived in my memory, the one I forgave without invitation. Each evening after visiting the site, I'd return to my apartment, sit by the window, and write in the little notebook. Not stories, not exactly. Fragments. Sentences that came and went like weather. The opposite of anger isn't peace, it's clarity. Gratitude without respect is a chain, not a gift. Paper remembers, but silence echoes longer. Sometimes I tore the pages out and burned them over the sink. Other times, I kept them folded between the documents in my box. There was something comforting about hiding truth between lines of ink and contract. Eileen would ask how I was doing. I'd tell her about the construction. She'd bring coffee cake and insist I eat 2 pieces. I never argued. She said kindness should be accepted as easily as sunlight, or else it stops visiting. On Sundays, I still volunteered at the church pantry. People there called me the quiet one. They didn't know my story, but they could read it in my eyes. The pastor once said that forgiveness is a door that opens inward first. I thought about that for days. Maybe that's why it takes so long to walk through. By late summer, the house was finished. The smell of new paint filled the rooms, and the floorboards creaked politely under my shoes. I walked from room to room with the blueprints still folded in my hand, as if comparing the life I'd planned to the life I had built. There was no chandelier, no fireplace, no marble countertop, only space, sunlight, and quiet. In the living room window, I hung white curtains that moved gently in the afternoon wind. In the center of the front yard, I placed a sign, nothing fancy, just a piece of wood with painted letters that read, Todd Haven S. 2025. When the sign dried, I stepped back and took a photo. The picture caught the light just right, the kind of light that makes things look truer than memory. I printed a copy, slipped it into an envelope, and wrote their names on the front. No note inside. The photo said enough. That evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the same wooden box resting beside me. Inside it were papers that had once been weapons but now felt like witness. I opened it one last time, looked at my name, and whispered, "You did it, Rosie. You didn't break." The sun dipped low, painting the world in bronze. Somewhere far away, another house stood empty. And I, for the first time in a long time, did not. Even after the walls were up and the sign stood proudly in the front yard, I still woke each morning expecting something to be unfinished. The house was quiet, too quiet at times, as if holding its breath, waiting for the next decision. I brewed coffee, listened to the kettle hiss, and thought of how strange it felt to wake without dread. Peace, when you are not used to it, can sound like loneliness at first. I began planting small things. Marigolds by the mailbox, lavender near the kitchen window, a few tomato vines in raised beds that Mr. Lee helped me build from leftover wood. I watered them each morning, watching the soil darken and drink. It felt like tending to a wound that had finally started to close. Sometimes I sat on the porch steps and watched the road stretch empty for miles. No cars slowed. No familiar faces appeared. I was invisible again, but this time it was a kind of freedom. The world didn't expect me to apologize for existing anymore. Eileen visited once a week. She brought gossip from the parish and casseroles in foil pans that could have fed a small army. She liked to talk, and I liked to listen. She told me about her late husband, about how he had left her with debts that took her 10 years to clear, about the first time she stood in her kitchen after paying off the last one. "It's strange," she said, "how the heart learns to breathe again when the numbers stop chasing it." I smiled. "Yes, breathing feels different when it's your own." She nodded and squeezed my hand. "You're stronger than you think." After she left, I took out the wooden box and opened it once more. Inside were all the versions of my name the world had tried to shape, on checks, on contracts, on condolence cards, on utility bills. Each one had weight. I thought of burning them, of letting the smoke rise like a quiet exhale of everything I'd carried. But I couldn't. Fire forgets too easily. I wanted memory, not ash. Instead, I placed a single new page on top, the deed to Todd Haven. My name was printed there again, but this time it didn't feel like proof of survival. It felt like authorship. Days found their rhythm. I volunteered at the pantry twice a week, helped Eileen organize a book drive for the local library, and even joined a watercolor class on Thursdays. The first time I picked up a brush, my hand trembled. I hadn't painted since Evan was in grade school, when we made a mess of the kitchen table, and he'd insisted that blue and green made the color of breathing. I painted small things, mugs, chairs, shadows, nothing grand. Once I painted the wooden box. I didn't mean to. My hand moved on its own, tracing its outline in soft gray. When the paint dried, I realized I had painted it slightly open, as if something inside it were glowing. The class instructor asked what it represented. I said, something that learned to outlast the people who forgot it. She laughed softly, not understanding, and said, "That's a strong image." In the evenings, I wrote again in my notebook. Not fragments this time, but whole pages. I wrote about the pantry, the volunteers, the quiet grace of ordinary kindness. I wrote about the sound of the kettle when it clicks off and the way the lavender catches sunlight through the window. I wrote about forgiveness, not the kind people ask for, but the kind you give yourself because no one else knows how. Some nights, though, the dreams returned. I'd find myself back at the old house, standing on the porch, knocking on the door that wouldn't open. The dream, I could hear laughter inside, plates clinking, children's footsteps, but no one came. I'd wake before the door moved. I never forced it open. I think part of me understood that the door wasn't mine anymore, and maybe it never really was. To calm myself after those dreams, I'd walk barefoot across the cool floorboards. The wood creaked beneath me, speaking in small syllables of memory and time. I liked the sound. It reminded me that even stillness has a heartbeat. Winter came again. Snow dusted the roof in soft white sheets, and the world outside fell quiet in a different way. I decorated the porch with a small wreath. Eileen insisted on bringing a tree small enough to fit on the table. She decorated half of it before sighing, "You know what this house needs, people." I smiled. "Not yet," she shook her head. "Someday." After she left, I sat beside the small tree and read through my notebook. One sentence caught my eye. I had written it weeks earlier, almost carelessly. "Kindness means nothing when it costs you yourself." I ran my finger under the words and felt the truth of them sink deeper. The phone rang once that night. A number I didn't recognize. I didn't answer. It rang again the next night. Still, I let it go. Sometimes healing means not reaching for the sound that once hurt you. Then, on the third night, I stood by the phone and listened as it rang once, twice, 3 times, and stopped. The silence that followed didn't ache the way it used to. It just existed. A week later, a letter came addressed in handwriting I hadn't seen in months. My son's. It wasn't long, just a few sentences. "Mom, I saw the photo. The sign looks beautiful. The kids miss you. I know I hurt you. I hope you're happy. Evan." I held the letter for a long time before I read it again. My hands didn't shake this time. I folded it once, placed it in the wooden box, and whispered, "I am." Outside, the wind picked up. The lavender trembled in its pot but didn't break. Inside, the kettle began to whistle softly, like a friend calling from another room. That night I slept without dreaming. The door in my mind finally stayed closed, and for the first time, I didn't need it to open. The day they came back was warmer than it should have been. The kind of unseasonable warmth that makes the air feel wrong on your skin, as if the world itself is uneasy. I was in the garden, trimming the lavender that had already begun to turn gray at the tips. The soil was soft, still wet from last night's rain. I heard the tires on gravel before I saw the car. A silver sedan rolled to a stop near the gate. The sound of the engine cutting off carried that particular tension of unfinished business. When I looked up, they were both there, Evan and Samantha. I didn't move. I wiped my hands on my apron, slow and calm. They stood on the other side of the gate for a few seconds, unsure whether to open it or wait to be invited. "Mom," Evan called softly. His voice had changed again, not the confident tone from months ago, not the pleading one from the last call. This was something in between, fragile, like glass that had already cracked and knew it. Samantha stepped forward first. Her hair was shorter, her face thinner, but she still carried herself like someone trying to stay composed in front of strangers. "Rosie," she began, her voice careful. "We didn't know where else to go." I didn't say anything. Silence is a kind of power, and I had learned to wield it well. They finally opened the gate and walked up the path. Evan looked around at the garden, the little porch, the sign by the steps that still read Todd Haven S. 2025. He smiled faintly, but it wasn't happiness. "It's beautiful," he said. "You really did it." "Yes," I said. "I did." We went inside. I made tea because it was easier than deciding what else to do. The kettle hissed softly between us, the same way it had the day they'd come to ask for my signature. Except this time, the table belonged to me, and every sound in this house answered to me. Samantha sat stiffly, eyes darting around as if looking for a way to make the place smaller, easier to control. Evan rubbed his hands together, fidgeting with the edge of his sleeve. "We lost the house," he said finally. After the auction, things got worse. The cafe never opened. Investors pulled out. We tried renting for a while, but then the landlord raised the rent. "We're staying in a motel now. The kids are with her sister." He said it quickly, as if speed might soften the confession. I poured the tea. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it, but not in the way he hoped. Samantha's composure cracked first. We didn't come for pity, she said sharply, then sighed. We thought maybe if we could talk, maybe you could help us start over. I set the teapot down and looked at her. You want money? No, she said too quickly, not like that. Then she hesitated. Well, maybe a loan just to get back on our feet. You have that property now, and Evan cut her off. We'll pay you back, I swear, we just need a few months. The words were too familiar. They floated in the room like ghosts. I leaned back in my chair. You said that once before, I said quietly. Do you remember? Evan's eyes lowered. Yes. Do you remember what I said then? He hesitated. You said it was the last time. That's right, I said. The room went still. Outside, a bird sang, unaware that the moment had frozen inside these walls. I'm not angry, I said after a while. I stopped being angry a long time ago. Anger ties you to the person who hurt you. I let go of that. He looked up, confused. Then why? Because letting go doesn't mean forgetting, I interrupted gently. It means remembering without bleeding. Samantha's eyes welled up. Please, Rosie, we made mistakes, but we're family. Yes, I said, and family is supposed to mean something. That's why it hurt when it didn't. She covered her face with her hands. Evan reached for her, then stopped halfway, as if unsure who he was trying to comfort. I stood and walked to the small cabinet in the corner. From the top shelf, I took out the wooden box. I placed it on the table between us and opened it slowly. Inside, the papers were still there, the deed, the loan documents, the letter from the bank confirming the sale, and the photo I'd sent them months ago of the sign outside. I lifted the top page and slid it across the table. This, I said, is everything I own, and everything I am not willing to lose again. Evan stared at the paper as if it were alive. Samantha wiped her tears and looked too, her eyes scanning the lines she didn't understand. You don't owe me an apology, I continued. I already accepted it the day I signed this. What you owe is to yourselves, the life you keep running from, the one that asks you to face what you've done without expecting someone else to clean it up. Evan's voice broke. Mom, please don't do this. I'm not doing anything, I said softly. I'm just not saving you anymore. He leaned forward, desperate now. We have nowhere to go. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, neither did I. He closed his eyes. A single tear slid down his cheek, the kind that doesn't ask for forgiveness, only acknowledgement. I never wanted to be like this, he whispered. No one does, I said, but people still become it. Samantha stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. Come on, Evan, she said, her voice trembling between anger and shame. We shouldn't have come. He didn't move. He just sat there, shoulders slumped, staring at the papers. What happens now? You start over, I said. You find work. You pay your debts, you stop looking backward. He looked around the house at the white curtains, the clean floors, the simple furniture. You built this, he said, almost to himself. Yes, I said, out of the pieces you left behind. He nodded slowly, the weight of understanding settling in. Then he stood, took Samantha's hand, and walked toward the door. Before he stepped out, he turned back. Mom, he said quietly, I'll pay you back someday, all of it. I smiled faintly. You can't pay back time. Just make it worth something. When they were gone, I sat alone in the silence they'd left behind. It wasn't the heavy silence from years ago, it was clean now, emptied of pity and resentment. I made myself another cup of tea and carried it to the porch. The sun was beginning to dip low, washing the sky in amber and rose. I could still see the faint marks from their shoes on the path, the dirt disturbed by their brief visit. The kettle inside whistled once, a small reminder that life keeps moving even when conversations don't. I thought of the girl I used to be, the mother who believed that love meant rescue. I thought of all the nights I spent trying to buy peace with sacrifice. I thought of every silence that used to terrify me and realized I no longer feared any of them. The wind carried the scent of lavender through the yard. The flowers swayed gently, bending but not breaking. I ran my fingers through them and smiled. They would grow again next season, they always did. As the sun slipped below the horizon, I whispered to the fading light, I didn't win, I just stopped losing. I closed the gate, the latch clicking softly into place, the sound of a chapter ending not with applause, but with certainty. Inside, I put the wooden box back on the shelf. I no longer needed to keep it close. Some memories are safe once you stop feeding them. That night, I slept without dreams. And in the morning, when the light spilled through the curtains and touched the papers on my table, they didn't look like weapons or shields anymore. They looked like proof that I existed, that I had learned, that I had survived. The morning of the auction, the city was gray and reluctant, the kind of gray that smothers noise and memory alike. I woke before dawn without needing an alarm. Habit, maybe, or the faint tremor that visits even calm people on days when something long-awaited comes to an end. I didn't plan to attend. Some things are cleaner when witnessed from a distance. I made tea instead, poured it into a chipped mug, and sat by the window as the sky began to lighten. Somewhere, a gavel would strike wood, and an address would pass from one mouth to another. Paper would change hands, and the world would call it closure. I didn't need to see it. I had already lived the auction months ago, the moment they locked the door on me, the moment I walked away with nothing but the knowledge that nothing was finally enough. Still, I imagined the scene. Evan standing in the crowd, hands shoved deep into his pockets, trying to pretend he didn't care. Samantha beside him, face blank, because pride doesn't know how to mourn properly. A banker in a navy suit reciting numbers like prayers. Someone else raising a hand, claiming what they had tried to steal from me. And then silence. The silence that follows loss when even denial runs out of breath. I sipped my tea. It was still warm. By the time I left the house, the sun had risen. I walked to the small park by the river, the one with the bench where I first sat after moving out. The ducks were there again, unbothered by the business of humans. I sat and watched them glide over the water, their movements smooth and inevitable. There was something sacred in their simplicity. They didn't need forgiveness. They didn't need permission. They just moved forward every day across the same stretch of water that never stayed the same. I stayed until the wind began to pick up, then walked to the post office. I had a small envelope in my bag, one I had prepared weeks ago. Inside was a photograph of the sign outside my new home. On the back, in careful handwriting, I had written one line: "The future is always quieter than the past." I addressed it to Evan and Samantha's motel. I didn't sign it. Afterward, I stopped at the church pantry to help sort donations. Eileen was there, her hair tied up with a blue ribbon, humming something that might have been a hymn. She greeted me with her usual smile, wide and sure. "You didn't go?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "No," I said, "it doesn't need me there." She nodded. "You did what needed to be done." I didn't reply. Sometimes words make things smaller, and I didn't want to shrink this feeling. By noon, the pantry was full of chatter. Volunteers shared stories over ladles of soup and stacks of donated bread. I liked the sound, the honest rhythm of people trying to care for one another in small, stubborn ways. It reminded me that life, for all its cruelties, still found ways to make room for grace. When I got home that evening, a thin envelope was waiting in my mailbox. The return address was from the court. Inside, a single page: confirmation of property sale finalized. I read it once, then placed it on the table beside my tea mug. The legal phrasing was dry, but underneath it, I could hear the soft exhale of a story closing. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I just sat there, feeling the strange peace that comes when there's nothing left to prove. That night, I cooked dinner for one, roasted vegetables and a piece of fish, and ate slowly, savoring every bite. There was no one to talk to, no one to impress. Just me, the clock ticking gently on the wall, and the quiet confidence of a life that no longer needed validation. After dinner, I took the wooden box from the shelf one last time. I opened it, expecting the old ache to rise up, but it didn't. Instead, I saw something else, an invitation to begin again. The papers that once symbolized pain now looked like architecture. A structure built from lessons, signatures, and survival. I traced my name with a fingertip, whispering, "You did what you could, Rosie, that's enough." I carried the box outside to the porch. The sky was indigo, the stars faint behind thin clouds. The air smelled of wood smoke and wet earth. I set the box on the railing, opened the lid, and let the wind touch the edges of the papers. They fluttered softly, like wings testing freedom. For a long time, I watched them, not to make a gesture, not to dramatize, just to see what release looked like in real light. Then I closed the box again and brought it inside. Some memories are meant to stay. You don't have to burn everything to be free. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. I dressed, put on my coat, and drove to the small plot where I planned to start a garden. The frost on the ground sparkled under the early sun. I knelt, pushed my fingers into the soil, and smiled at how cold and alive it felt. Planting is a quiet rebellion. It says, "I will still believe in tomorrow." I sowed lavender first, then rosemary, then small wildflowers I didn't know the names of. As I worked, I thought of Evan and the children, of how much I still loved them in some hidden, untouchable way. Love, when it's real, doesn't die. It just changes its shape so it can survive the distance. When I finished, I stood, brushed the dirt from my knees, and whispered into the breeze, "Grow well." The weeks that followed were gentle. Evan called once. I saw his name flash on the screen, but I didn't pick up. I didn't have anger left, just quiet. He sent a message later, "We're okay. The kids are in school again." Thank you, I smiled when I read it. There was no need to answer. Gratitude doesn't always need to travel both ways. In the afternoons, I taught a class at the community center, simple budgeting lessons for women rebuilding after hardship. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. I saw my old self in them sometimes, the exhaustion, the trembling hope, the fierce will to start again. One evening after class, a young woman approached me. "You seem so calm," she said. "Weren't you ever scared?" "Every day," I said. "But fear doesn't get to make the rules." She smiled, maybe not understanding yet, but trying to. I remembered being her age, believing that love could fix everything. It can't, but it can help you survive the parts that logic alone can't reach. That night, I returned home to find the garden blooming early. The lavender had opened in soft clusters, and the air smelled of rain and second chances. I sat on the porch steps with a cup of tea and watched the last light fade. The world had taken things from me, money, family, years, but it had also given me this. A steady pulse of peace, small but unshakable. I thought of all the versions of myself that had led here. The mother pleading over a phone call, the woman locked out of her own house, the ghost with a deed in her hand, the builder with soil beneath her nails. They were all still me, standing quietly inside this body, finally in agreement. For the first time, I didn't feel divided between past and present. I was both the woman who had lost and the woman who had learned. The crickets began their song. The air cooled. Somewhere far away, a train moved through the dark, its low hum reminding me that movement itself can be a kind of faith. I looked at the sign by the porch, Todd Haven Est 2025. The paint was beginning to chip from the corners, but I liked it that way. Perfection is overrated. It's the cracks that let the story breathe. Before going inside, I whispered into the night, "It's done." And it was, no fireworks, no applause. Just the soft, honest quiet of a life rebuilt not from victory, but from endurance. That night when I lay in bed, I thought of the word auction. Once it had meant loss, things being taken from me. Now it felt like the opposite, because I realized that what had been sold that day wasn't my house. It was my guilt, my silence, my habit of saying yes to what hurt, and what I bought back, what I claimed without raising a hand, was myself. It was a Sunday afternoon in late spring when the phone rang again. Not sharply, not like before, just a soft vibration against the kitchen counter, almost shy in its insistence. I was kneeling by the window, repotting a young rosemary plant that had outgrown its first home. The sun lay across the floor in long golden bands, touching everything gently, even the dust. For a moment, I didn't move. The sound didn't startle me anymore, it just reminded me that I still had connections out there, fragile threads leading to places I no longer lived. When I finally stood and wiped the soil from my hands, I saw the name on the screen. Evan. I breathed in once, slow and steady, before answering. "Hi, Mom." His voice was different, quieter, slower, the edges rounded by exhaustion or humility. I couldn't tell which, maybe both. "Hello, Evan," he hesitated. "I wasn't sure you'd pick up." "I wasn't sure either," I said, and meant it kindly. There was a long pause. I could hear traffic in the background, maybe a car window half open, a child's voice far away. "I saw your picture," he said finally. "The house, the garden, it looks peaceful." "It is," I replied. "It took time." "I know." Another pause. "The kids want to visit someday, if that's okay." "Someday," I said softly. "Not yet." He exhaled, the sound catching a little, the way people breathe when they're learning to accept consequences. "I understand." Then silence again, but not the old kind, not the one thick with accusation or shame. This silence was gentler, like two people standing on opposite sides of a river watching the same current. "I've been working," he said at last. "Got a steady job at the shipping yard. It's hard work, but honest. We're saving again. The kids are doing better. Samantha's teaching part-time." "I'm glad," I said, and I was. He cleared his throat. "I think about you, about everything. I was angry for so long, and I didn't even know at what. You were right. I thought love was something you could borrow forever." I smiled to myself. "And now I'm trying to earn it," he said. "The hard way. That's the only way it lasts." There was a sound like wind brushing the receiver, a car door opening, then closing. He spoke again, softer this time. "I wanted to say thank you. Not for the money or the house or any of that. For stopping, for walking away. If you hadn't, I don't think I would have learned." I turned toward the window. The rosemary gleamed in its new pot. The lavender outside had started to bloom again, its purple heads nodding like old friends who'd seen me through too many seasons. "Sometimes," I said, "love is knowing when not to help." He laughed quietly, a small, fragile sound. "That sounds like something you'd say." "It sounds like something I had to learn." Another pause. Do you think we'll ever be okay? Evan, I said gently, we already are, we're not who we were, that's enough. He didn't answer for a while, then barely above a whisper, I love you, Mom. The words were simple, stripped of decoration, and for once they didn't feel like payment, they felt like truth. I know, I said, I love you too. He exhaled again, steadier now. Goodbye. Goodbye, I said, and the call ended. For a long time I stood there, phone still in hand, the quiet of the house filling back in around me. I thought I might cry, but I didn't. There are tears that never need to fall, they live inside you like water in deep wells, clear and endless. I set the phone down and went back to the rosemary. Its roots were spread wide, ready for space. I added more soil, pressed it gently, and whispered, there you go. Later that evening, I took a walk. The air was cool, the kind of softness that lingers after rain. The road stretched out ahead, familiar but new in every light. The old church bells rang in the distance, 6 notes, slow and patient. I remembered how the sound had terrified me once, each toll marking another hour of loneliness. But now it just sounded like time keeping me company. When I reached the edge of my property, I turned back to look at the house. The porch light was on, spilling warmth over the steps. In the window, I could see the small reflection of the sign outside, Todd Haven. The letters had begun to fade in places, the paint chipped by weather, but I didn't plan to fix it. I liked things that wore their history honestly. I sat on the porch, poured myself a cup of tea, and watched the stars appear one by one. Some twinkled bright and short-lived, others burned steady, too far away to ever reach. It struck me how much life resembled that, some people blazing through your story in a flash, others lingering quietly, unseen but constant. The night deepened. Somewhere far away, I imagined Evan tucking the kids into bed, Samantha turning off a lamp, the soft hum of a new beginning finding its rhythm. I didn't need to be there to know it. Some connections don't need proximity, they just need peace. Inside the house, the wooden box sat where it always did, on the top shelf. I hadn't opened it in weeks. I didn't need to anymore. The papers inside had done their job, they'd kept me safe until I could learn to live without needing proof. Tomorrow, I might move the box to the attic. Not to hide it, but to let it rest. Memory deserves rest too. Before going to bed, I stood at the door and looked once more at the garden. The lavender swayed lightly in the breeze, and the moonlight turned the petals silver. I thought about everything that had happened, the calls, the nights, the locked doors, the auctions, the silences, and I realized that every ending had quietly been a beginning disguised as loss. When you survive long enough, you stop asking for happy endings. You start craving honest ones. And honesty, I had learned, could be gentle too. I turned off the lights, climbed into bed, and let the quiet fold around me. My heartbeat matched the rhythm of the night outside, calm, unhurried, free. Just before sleep came, I thought of one more sentence, the kind that arrives when you've said everything that needs saying. I am not the woman who was saved. I am the woman who stopped drowning. The phone didn't ring again that night. It didn't need to. In the silence, I could hear everything that mattered, the wind, the faint creak of the porch, the whisper of growing things. And for the first time in my life, I didn't wait for anything more. I was already home.